When people talk about the internet, they usually think of apps, websites, or social media platforms. But the internet is not abstract, it is physical. About 95% of all international data travels through fiber optic cables laid across the ocean floor. These cables land at specific coastal stations, pass through specific countries, and connect to specific data centers. For decades, most of those routes followed paths designed and financed by Western companies, often passing through the United States or Europe. That gave a small group of countries enormous influence over how global data moves, where it flows, and how secure it is. China does not want to rely on that system anymore. Over the past decade, Beijing has started building its own global connectivity network under the banner of the Digital Silk Road, a technology-focused extension of the Belt and Road Initiative. The goal is simple but massive in scale. Connect China directly to the rest of the world through infrastructure it helps finance, build, and operate. This effort is not centered on a single cable or a single country. It includes undersea fiber optic systems like the Peace Cable linking Asia, Africa, and Europe. It includes land-based fiber routes running through Pakistan and Central Asia. It includes overseas data centers built by Chinese companies. And increasingly, it includes satellites designed to provide internet access from space. Taken together, these projects form a new global internet route, one that runs alongside the existing Western-dominated network instead of depending on it. So before judging whether this is good or bad, one question comes first. What exactly is China building, and how does this new internet route actually work? Over the last decade, Chinese firms and state-backed telecom companies have moved aggressively into the submarine cable business, not just as suppliers, but as owners, operators, and financiers of entire cable systems. One of the most important examples is the Peace Cable. Peace stands for Pakistan and East Africa Connecting Europe. It stretches roughly 15,000 kilometers, running from China's coast through Pakistan across the Arabian Sea, down the coast of East Africa, through the Red Sea, and into southern Europe. This route matters for two reasons. First, it creates a direct, high-capacity data link between China, Africa, and Europe that avoids many traditional Western-controlled hubs. Second, it shortens distance. Data traveling between East Africa and Asia used to detour through Europe. With Peace, latency drops, speeds increase, and countries like Kenya, Djibouti, and Egypt gain faster access to Asian markets. Chinese companies have helped build or supply equipment for dozens of submarine cables worldwide. By the early 2020s, Chinese firms were involved in over 10% of existing global undersea cables and nearly a quarter of new planned systems. That share keeps growing. Another example is the South Atlantic Interlink, a cable connecting Cameroon directly to Brazil. Before this, internet traffic between Africa and South America almost always routed through Europe or North America. This single cable created an entirely new data corridor across the South Atlantic. From China's perspective, these routes do something very specific. They reduce reliance on choke points controlled by rivals. Most global data still funnels through a few strategic locations, like the Suez Canal Zone, Western Europe, and US coastal landing stations. These are efficient, but also vulnerable. Cable cuts, sanctions, or political pressure can disrupt traffic. China's approach focuses on redundancy and control. Multiple routes, multiple landing points, means fewer single points of failure. And there's another layer to this. Submarine cables don't just move data, they create influence. Whoever builds and finances a cable often controls maintenance, upgrades, and access agreements. That means long-term relationships with governments, telecom regulators, and national carriers. In many developing countries, Chinese-backed cable projects arrive with financing Western firms are unwilling to offer. So the question is not just whether these cables work. The real question is what happens when a growing share of global data starts flowing through infrastructure designed, financed, and managed by one country. However, cables alone don't complete a global internet route. Once data reaches land, it still needs somewhere to go. That brings us to the next layer of the system: terrestrial fiber networks and data centers. Once data comes ashore, it doesn't stop. It moves through fiber networks on land, passes through routers and switches, and gets stored or processed inside data centers. This part of the internet matters just as much as the cables under the ocean. China understands that. That's why the new global internet route doesn't end at the coastline. One of the most strategic land routes runs through Pakistan. A fiber optic link now connects western China directly to Pakistan's southern coast. This creates the shortest data path between China and the Arabian Sea. From there, traffic can move into submarine cables heading toward Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. This route avoids India entirely. It also reduces China's exposure to maritime choke points that could become vulnerable during a crisis. Further north, China has expanded terrestrial fiber links through Central Asia. These routes connect China to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and beyond, eventually feeding into networks that reach Eastern Europe. For landlocked countries in the region, these projects provide faster connectivity. For China, they create another independent corridor into Europe. Across Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Middle East, Chinese companies have financed and built national data centers, government cloud systems, and telecom hubs. In Africa, Chinese firms have built a large share of backbone networks and digital infrastructure since 2010. By some estimates, Chinese loans funded more telecom infrastructure on the continent than Western governments and multilateral banks combined during that period. These investments offer real benefits. Faster internet access lowers costs, supports mobile banking, and expands access to online services. Many governments welcome them because alternatives are limited or expensive. But even cables and land routes can be disrupted. Earthquakes cut undersea cables. Political disputes block cross-border fiber. So China is building a backup that doesn't touch the ground at all. Cables can be cut, land routes can be blocked, but satellites don't rely on borders, ports, or seabed routes. That's exactly why China is now moving into orbit. For years, China depended on foreign satellite systems for global coverage. That changed when satellite internet became central to modern communications. Remote regions, ships at sea, military units, disaster zones, all of them now depend on space-based connectivity. China does not want to rely on anyone else for that, so it approved a state-backed satellite internet system designed to match the scale of Western networks. The project is known as Guowang, and it plans to deploy nearly 13,000 low Earth orbit satellites. To put that number in perspective, that's comparable to the size of SpaceX's Starlink constellation. The goal is simple: global coverage. Low Earth orbit satellites orbit much closer to the planet than traditional satellites. That reduces latency and allows broadband-level speeds. China launched the first batch of these satellites in late 2024. More launches are scheduled throughout the decade. This system connects directly to China's existing fiber and cable infrastructure. Data can move from a remote village up to orbit, down into a Chinese-managed ground station, and then across the digital Silk Road, without ever touching Western-controlled systems. That matters strategically. Satellite networks play a key role in modern conflicts. They support navigation, communication, intelligence, and logistics. Recent wars have shown how powerful commercial satellite internet can be when traditional infrastructure fails. China wants that same capability without relying on foreign companies. From China's perspective, the logic is consistent. Cables form the backbone. Land routes add redundancy. Satellites close the gaps. Together, they form an end-to-end system China controls. However, this entire system only works because the Chinese state and Chinese companies move together. At the center are a handful of firms that handle almost every layer of the network, from cables to cloud services. Huawei plays a major role. It supplies telecom equipment, fiber optic systems, routing hardware, and cloud infrastructure across dozens of countries. For years, it also built undersea cables through its marine division, which later became a separate company but continued operating within the same ecosystem. Huawei doesn't just sell equipment, it offers full systems, long-term maintenance, and financing support backed by Chinese policy banks. Then there are China's three state-owned telecom giants: China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom. These companies operate massive domestic networks, but they also invest directly in international cables, data centers, and foreign telecom ventures. When a new cable lands in Africa or the Middle East, one or more of these carriers is often part of the ownership consortium. This matters because ownership determines access. If a telecom carrier owns capacity on a cable, it controls how traffic moves, how upgrades happen, and how redundancy is managed. Over time, this gives Chinese operators influence over international routing decisions. Behind these companies sits the Chinese government. Chinese policy banks finance many of these projects. Loans often come with long repayment periods and few political conditions. For countries with limited access to Western financing, this makes Chinese offers hard to refuse. None of this means every project follows a hidden agenda. Many genuinely improve connectivity, but the system works because incentives line up. Governments want development. Chinese firms want markets. Beijing wants influence and resilience. And that combination scales fast. So how are other countries reacting to this shift? And what happens when major powers start pushing back? As China's digital footprint expanded, it triggered a reaction, especially from the United States and its allies. US officials argue that internet infrastructure is not neutral. Whoever builds and manages it can influence how data moves, who can access it, and how secure it really is. When that infrastructure comes from a country whose laws require companies to cooperate with state security agencies, alarms go off. Washington's first response focused on telecom networks. Countries like the US, Australia, the UK, and Japan restricted or banned Chinese equipment from their 5G systems. The concern centered on access. Modern telecom networks rely on constant software updates and remote management. If a foreign supplier controls that layer, it creates a permanent security question. Europe's response has been more divided. Some countries tightened screening rules for foreign infrastructure. Others continued working with Chinese firms, especially where alternatives were limited or more expensive. This split created tension inside the EU, where digital security and market access often pull in opposite directions. Meanwhile, developing countries face a different calculation. For many governments in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, the choice is not between China and the West. It's between China and nothing. Chinese financing arrives faster, requires fewer conditions, and delivers working infrastructure. Western alternatives often move slower or never materialize. That reality complicates efforts to slow China's expansion. China may have other motives, but what I see is a country filling a gap that existed for decades. While others debated standards and politics, China built cables, data centers, and connectivity in places that needed them urgently. Even if strategic interests are involved, the outcome is real infrastructure, real access, and a more distributed global internet that doesn't depend on a single center of power. And as long as countries choose these projects willingly, should outside powers decide what's acceptable for them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.